Hello, my name's Jono, and I'm the tour guide and historian here in Lichfield. Today we're representing Staffordshire History Festival, and this is the first of several video clips explaining about history on my patch. I'm here in the chapel of St Mary's Church on Lichfield's historic Market Square. It's said that there's been a church of some kind on this site since the 12th century, when the city streets were laid out by one of the former bishops of Lichfield, Roger de Clinton. Over the centuries, the church has changed, been altered, been refurbished, been demolished and rebuilt. In 1868, the original church, the medieval church, was demolished and replaced, opened in 1870, with a Victorian structure and built in a typical Gothic revival style. The previous church's tower was replaced with a spire, still stands today. Today, the church looks pretty much as it did in 1870. To the north of the chapel, the north of the church, stands the Diet Chapel, dedicated to the memory of one of Lichfield's longest standing, most respected and oldest families, the Diets of Freeford Manor. The Diet family name in Lichfield can be traced back to at least the 16th century, but by the 17th century they had moved out of Lichfield centre to a small hamlet just outside Lichfield, Freeford, on the Tamworth Road in the direction of the village of Whittington. They built a family home there. In the 19th century it was demolished and rebuilt as a true Georgian property. The Diet family continued at Freeford, or in Freeford Manor, and although the building has had alterations and additions, it is still the same building that was built in Georgian times. They were a well-respected Lichfield family and also were linked with a very historic event in Lichfield. During the English Civil War, Lichfield was embroiled in a fight between Royalists and Parliamentarian soldiers. The Diet family were Royalists, and one of their members was called John Diet. On the 2nd of March in 1643, the cathedral was being besieged by Parliamentarian forces and held by the Royalists, including Diet. He was positioned as a marksman, sniper, on the tower, the central spire of Lichfield Cathedral. On the morning of the 2nd of March, Parliamentarian General Lord Greville Brooke arrived to get the Royalists out of the cathedral, which they were using as a fortress. He marched with his leading commanders up Dam Street and stood by a building to observe the cathedral and its battlements. As he did that, John Diet spotted him on Dam Street, picked up his gun, aimed it, and fired a shot in the direction of Lord Brooke. As he did that, Lord Brooke lifted up the visor of his helmet, and Diet's bullet struck him full in the face. He dropped to the ground dead. He had only been in Lichfield a matter of hours. He was there to get the Royalists out of the cathedral, but within those few hours he lay dead on the ground. This made John Diet a hero for the Royalist forces and a noted name across Lichfield. Not only had he shot and killed Lord Greville Brooke, Parliamentarian General, but he shot him on the 2nd of March, a holy day for the city of Lichfield, because on the 2nd of March in the year 699, the very first bishop of Lichfield, Chad, died. So it was the holiest of days. The Royalists celebrated, believing that that meant they would win the battle and the war. As we know, it didn't turn out that way. But it cemented the Diet name in the history and the very fabric of Lichfield. After the close of the English Civil War, family tradition involving the Diets started. When leading members of the Diet family passed away, instead of being buried in a churchyard in Lichfield or in Whittington, instead the bodies were brought here to St Mary's Church and were buried in a crypt or vault underneath the church itself. The ceremonies would always take place at midnight, in the depth of night. It's not known why this tradition started. It may well have been due to the Diet's participation on the Royalist side during the English Civil War, and as such, when they had their burial ceremonies, they couldn't be done in public. And also, the ceremonies took place at midnight so that no one would be there to view it. For the next 200 years, members of the Dyack family, when they passed away, were brought here in a funeral cortege. It travelled by torch or candlelight from Freeford Manor into Lichfield Centre, and then, as the church bells of St Mary's rang out at midnight, the burial ceremony took place. By the end of the 19th century, the Dyack family line was about to die out. The last remaining member of the original Dyack family was Lieutenant Colonel Richard Dyack, a very well-respected person in and around Lichfield, and was for many years Member of Parliament for Lichfield and government. In February 1891, he fell very ill and died shortly afterwards. On the 21st of February, the year 1891, his body was brought by other members of the Dyack family here to St Mary's Church, where, as the clock struck midnight, he too was buried in the crypt and vault underneath the floors of the church. His was the last of 13 Lichfield Dyack family members to be buried in the crypt. After he passed away, the Freeford estate passed to a distant cousin who changed his name to become a Dyack again. The family name continues. But Richard Dyack became the last member of the family to be buried here in St Mary's Church crypt. The Dyack family continued to live at Freeford Manor. St Mary's Church continued, but by the 1970s, the attendances at its church services had dwindled to such a degree it was no longer viable to have it as a church. In the 1980s, the church was decommissioned and it was converted into a multi-use building. A cafe, meeting room, community room, a shop and Lichfield Museum. And then, just under 2 years ago, it went through another transformation. Today, it is Lichfield Library, part of Staffordshire Libraries, and on the mezzanine floor, it's the hub at St Mary's, an exhibition, an art space, and a coffee shop. But in the north corner of the Dyack Chapel, dedicated to the memory of the Dyack family, there is the crypt and the vault. 2 years ago, during the final transformation, members of the current Dyack family visited the church to gain access to the crypt. But when they lifted the entrance to the steps leading down to it, they discovered that during the 1980s it had been infilled with concrete, probably for safety reasons, to prevent people falling down the steps. And so 13 members of the Dyack family lie underneath the church, entombed, possibly in the crypt, forever. Today, St Mary's is a vibrant space with the library and also the cafe and the hub on the mezzanine floor, and it's often filled with people, especially during the current time. But it is also part of Lichfield's history and heritage. And the Dyack Chapel, St Mary's Church, on Lichfield's historic Market Square, is definitely a slice of history on our patch.